Welcome to the S.O.A.P video series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We have been working for quite a while now. Several weeks, almost 2 months, at a week at a time, working through the book of Ezekiel, and we're more than halfway through. We've gotten into some pretty interesting stuff, and we ended last week with the picture of Satan and some other stuff, right?
Yeah, we have, which is kind of weird, right? So when you think about it, we got some understanding of angels, understanding about Satan, and we're going to get some other understanding as we move along.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit unexpected.
Yeah.
In there, because the base thing that we're talking about is Jerusalem. God leaving Jerusalem, Jerusalem being destroyed, and then what happens after that.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, most of the prophets tend to focus on Israel, and Ezekiel did that for a long time, but I mean, we had some angel stuff in there, some cherubim, which the other prophets don't typically talk about.
Right.
And now we're into some other nations.
Yeah, now we're in other nations. So last week we started talking about other nations that God had a grab against, that as he's putting judgment on Israel, now he's going to go out to these other nations.
And primarily because
they treated Israel lightly,
Yeah.
is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And either they were 100% against them and fought against them, or they literally treated them lightly on there.
Yeah.
So the punishment that God's gonna dole out is actually going to be done by Babylon as they work through there. But of course, God is directing them, even though Nebuchadnezzar may not agree with that statement. And we also continue to see a lot of, and then you will know that I am Lord.
Yeah.
And to me, that's one of my biggest takeaways from reading through it this time is the whole reason God is doing this, the whole reason it allows to happen. One is people deserved it, but two is God is jealous and he is maintaining and defending his right and his face in front of people.
Yeah.
And then people will know, good or bad, that he is the Lord.
And one of the things, especially with these other nations who, worship other gods, one of the things that we forget in our modern culture is that in ancient times, every civilization had a national religion, had national gods, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we saw last time when one of the nations said, "Oh, Israel, you're just like the rest of them."
Right.
God takes that a little personally.
I took it personal. I was like, "Wow, God has to defend himself against that." Yeah.
You think back with Moses, and it was God against the Egyptian gods. Sort of like this. In comic books or in superhero movies or whatever. The battle of the Titans or the battle of the superheroes or whatever. God is doing battle, in a sense, with these demonic forces. And last time we saw Satan behind the king of Tyre, right? And so we don't like to think, we don't really think of things like that. We sort of are blind to this supernatural battle. Right. It's really out there. Yeah. But it really is out there. And so when God is doing battle against these nations, it's really against these demonic gods, these false gods behind the nations.
Right. So we're starting out this week mid-chapter, so we're going to be in chapter 28, about halfway through, if not more, and we're going through other nations that God is going to dole out punishment with. First one is a nation called Sidon, about 25 miles north of Tyre, where we spent a lot of time last week talking about that, but still on the Mediterranean Sea.
Yeah, still modern-day Lebanon, north of Israel.
So they're going to be attacked by the sword on all sides. I love the all sides because there's also on the water, right?
Yeah.
They will suffer a plague, and God said Israel received sharp briars and thorns because of them, right? So not necessarily directly opposing them, but certainly caused problems with them. I do like the end of this chapter. God has a prophetic revelation. So it just means something that hasn't happened yet, right? It's going to be happening in the future. And God says, when I regather the house of Israel, so right away you think, well, the house of Israel did come back together and went back into Jerusalem. But when you read on, it's like, yeah, but this part hasn't happened
not yet.
Yeah. So he will reveal his sovereign power. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but if you think about end times, there's a lot more revealing in there. They will live in the land he gave Jacob. That certainly is not happening today, nor has it happened too much in the past, or ever in the past, right? They will live securely. That hasn't happened. And they will build houses and plant vineyards.
Yeah.
So certainly part of that happens,
Yeah.
but I don't think to the extent where
So
they're
what's
talking
interesting
about.
is that phrase to build houses and plant vineyards, that will be repeated in Zechariah, which is after the return, but it's still future. So we're still looking, it's this concept of being able to eat your own food and live securely in the land.
And if you're going to put in the time in the land to do grapes and to do a wine press, bad forces can come in and just take it from you.
Right, which we've seen multiple times throughout
Exactly.
history.
So I think a lot of that is there's a feeling of safety to be able to even have a vineyard in the first place.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're in chapter 29, and we're starting to talk about Egypt.
Yeah.
And Egypt, I think, gets 4 chapters.
Yeah, we're going to take some time in Egypt, right?
Yeah. Well, so as I was making my notes, Egypt takes this chapter, and then I went to chapter 30, and I had to go back. Oh, wait, it's 2 chapters, and then 3 chapters, and 4. I think I got them all updated, but it gets at least 4 chapters. And Ezekiel was told to prophesize against Egypt. Now, we also have a date point in here, and the date point is actually before the prophecy against Tyre.
Yeah.
A little bit out of order, but not that it matters much.
Yeah, probably because there's one in chapter 31 is another date point in the 11th year as opposed to the 10th. Probably just to
Get them together.
keep them together, I would imagine. 12th year in chapter 32. I think we're just taking all of the prophecy against Egypt and just combining them. Yeah, that's my guess.
So God treats Pharaoh in the chapter as a crocodile or a river creature, and Egypt was guilty of pride. And he says things like, Egypt says, "I own the Nile because I made it," and God says, "Wait, what? Really? You're saying that?" So God says he's going to put hooks into his jaw and haul him out of the water and throw him in the wilderness. Yeah. And he's talking about the nation of Egypt and maybe the Pharaoh or the leader there.
Yeah,
too.
it's really cool. God's using the picture because, and again, think back into ancient times. Nebuchadnezzar thought he was a god, or at least, the son of the gods. The king of Tyre thought he was a god, and God reminded him, no, you're a man. Yeah. Same thing. The pharaohs always thought that they were deity, right? So, so he treats them, you say that you made the Nile. It's like, come on, I made the Nile, but fine. I'm going to treat you. You think you're so big, I'm going to knock you down. The bigger they are, the harder they fall type thing, right? And the connection to a crocodile makes sense with the Nile River right there, the great monster. But there is the Hebrew word often refers to the Leviathan, which often
really is a monster.
It really is a monster. The physically is a monster, but then spiritually it also sometimes connects to Satan as that great dragon. So we're seeing this theme come up where these nations aren't just, against Israel. It's always satanic against Israel. And God, again, is going to smack them down physically and spiritually.
So God's going to bring the sword against Egypt and kill every person and every animal, which I thought was interesting, the animal part. So much so that Egypt and the Nile is going to be uninhabited for 40 years.
Yeah.
And then at the end, Egypt's people will be brought back in.
Yes.
Which is kind of cool. And then the next sentence is, and they're going to remain insignificant.
Yep.
Which is wild, right? A world power, like you said, gets taken down a couple notches. Now they're kind of regrouping, but they're never going to come close to retaining that stature that they have. Right. If we look back in history, they haven't. Right.
But they are named as a nation which will still be in existence in the millennium, in the future. Zechariah refers to Egypt by name. So
they hang around,
they're
but
never going to be completely wiped out again, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. This is also a reminder to Israel how they sinned when they turned to Egypt for help.
Yep.
God also talks about why he's giving up Egypt, and one of the reasons is for King Nebuchadnezzar. So King Nebuchadnezzar is doing God's bidding,
Yep.
but he's not getting any financial gain on some of these places that he's attacking. So he definitely will with Egypt. So that's why he's giving Egypt over to him to plunder.
Yep.
In chapter 30, we get into a lament for Egypt. Where it says the sword's coming for them, and Nebuchadnezzar is going to carry off her wealth. And we also see that Egypt's allies are also going to be killed.
Yeah.
And here we find Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon are specifically named.
Yeah.
I think up until this point, it was you will be taken out, and it was nebulous who it was. And now
it's a little bit more specific.
Named.
I love the naming in here, not just Nebuchadnezzar, but the naming Memphis, the god of Memphis. We've got Pathros, we have Zoan, we have Thebes. Thebes is a major thing even now. Ethiopia and so other places in northern and eastern Africa.
I was surprised to see Ethiopia in there.
Yeah.
From my perspective, Ethiopia is one of the. Well, they believe they have the ark, which seems like they wouldn't have been against God at this time.
But we have this is recent.
Yeah.
Right. This is recent to the fall of this is new with the fall of Israel at this, like in Ezekiel's time. Right.
Right.
So Ethiopia is wouldn't have necessarily had that prominence yet. Right. So yeah.
Right. So God says he's going to break Egypt's arms, and it seems like military defeats in there to weaken the nation. And it is interesting to me that after the time of pharaohs and after this time, Egypt hasn't been a national powerhouse. Yeah. Chapter 31, I found it a bit of a misdirection. It's 18 verses. And 17 and a half of the verses are about the cedars of Lebanon. Mm-hmm. So it's like, what are we doing? Where are we going? How do we get here? And God talks about how great the cedars are for the most part. And David actually used the wood for his palace, and Solomon used the wood for the temple.
Yep.
So it's talked about in David and Solomon's time. Trees were very tall and majestic, and supposedly the cedar retained its fragrance too, which is kind of cool.
Which we still use cedar wood for today, closets and stuff.
Yeah, but every now and then you got to go back and sand it a little bit to get that
bring
smell.
It back out.
And
yeah.
I don't know if I'm sure you had to at some point. So then, towards the end, God asks Egypt to consider who is great like they are. And then he says, consider Assyria. And Assyria is certainly a point against Egypt. Mm-hmm. And at this point, Assyria was one of the greatest nations and one of the only few nations to successfully invade Egypt, too, which is huge. But they had fallen to Babylon. And now Babylon, who is bigger, Babylon, who is tougher, is getting ready to knock on Egypt's door.
Yeah.
So this whole cedar thing isn't really about cedars; it's about the big dog coming.
Yep.
And it's Babylon.
Yep. Verse 2: Say to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, who are you compared? And then it comes back at the end.
It comes back there. Yep, exactly. Yeah. And it's their proudness, like we had said before, is why they're coming down. And then in chapter 32, we go about halfway through to verse 16, and now it's all about lions, right? You're a lion, among nations, and again, then it switches, and we see what it's really about, where God says, "I'm just going to bring my net." And I'm going to capture you. I'm going to fling you in an open field to die and to be consumed. Yeah. Which is basically what he said 4 chapters ago.
Yeah.
On here's what now instead of a crocodile, it's the same thing with a lion.
Yep.
And again, he restates that all the people and all the animals are going to die, and then you will know that I am the Lord.
Yeah. And he does mention the king of Babylon again specifically. So I mean, it's. Yeah, like you've mentioned a few times, we're seeing the same thing over and over.
But that's the emphasis, angles, and it's intentional.
That's what's going on. Yeah.
So this is how how important, and this is God defending Himself.
Yeah.
And who He's going to defend against.
Yeah. Well, and that brings us to the end of this week's reading. There is a little bit left to do with other nations, and then we're going to refocus attention back on Israel,
Right.
and as we move toward
future.
move toward the end of the book of Ezekiel. So.
We're getting there.
Yeah, we are getting there. And it really is interesting seeing how God approaches these other nations, right? And the things that he is going to punish them for. God doesn't change, right? Some of his rules, some of his laws change, but God himself doesn't change. So when, it doesn't matter what year it is, when nations bump up against God and his standards, we're going to see the same thing over and over again, right? So... hopefully you're finding this interesting and new, maybe for some of you who've never read it before, and some of the connections that we're making, especially with the end times, because this isn't the end, right? There's still a lot to come, both here in Ezekiel and in the future. So if you have questions or comments, please make sure you send those in. Otherwise, we will pick up here in the middle of chapter 32 next time, and we'll keep going.
Bye, everybody.